foreign predatory parasitic corporations are replacing our natural environment with an industrial landscape of wind turbines. One Nation will stand against sending children down a path of drug dependency and body mutilation to appease the gender cult. Leave our kids alone. The Trusted Digital Identity Bill is a global surveillance and control mechanism that profit-hungry corporations and power-mad politicians drafted and crafted. One Nation opposes this inhuman, dystopian future that the United Nations promotes as the Great Reset, and we condemn this Parliament for signing on to it. I called for Australia to reject the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and instead mount a great resist. Just like the koalas being euthanised to make way for wind turbines, or damaged solar panels leaking toxic heavy metals into waterways, the United Nations net zero plan again involves killing the environment to save it. I've been speaking about the fear, the oppression and the inhuman cruelty of our COVID response since July 2020. I promised to hound down those responsible, and I will continue relentlessly to keep that promise. You're about to be live with me, Senator Malcolm Roberts. Well, g'day. It's time for the weekly wrap-up from the only opposition party, the only party truly serving the Australian people. As usual, Heroes Gallery to start with. And Heroes Gallery means citizens active in democracy. First one is Beck Knight, Baffle Creek. She's a real powerhouse in the community up there. It's just south of the Gladstone area. I've got some jokes about Baffle Creek, but not about Baffle Creek so much as about a friend I have up there. But anyway, I'm not going to tell you the jokes now, but they've been devastated by floods and communities have been smashed around, and Beck has been outspoken in trying to get their muster area set up because it's been closed. It's been closed at a time, and they've had to use the flood victims have had to use the facilities of the SES. And the SES have been sleeping on the floor and chairs and whatever while flood victims are sleeping in the bed. So thank you so much for the SES. And thank you, Beck, for speaking up. But Beck didn't just draw attention to it and yell loudly about it. She wants a forum with the federal member for Flynn, the electorate, with the state member for Flynn, who's a state member for the local seat, who she's terribly disappointed in, and the local council, because clearly it wasn't coordinated. And but even more importantly, probably, so as well as learning lessons for the future, what she did was organise a barbecue with sausage sizzle for the locals, to get them all back into the community, to reach out, share each other's stories. She knows how important that is. She's worked in the SES before herself, so she knows how important community is. So thank you so much, Beck, actively involved in democracy. Next, to all the candidates and volunteers in South Australia with One Nation. I met up with 4 candidates, and they're all top class, top people. In Colton, I went to the seat of Colton and the pre-poll there, and Rocco DeAngelis and his wife, South African wife, and he's from Calabria, which is just across the water from Sicily on the mainland of Italy. Wonderful couple. In Morford, I met with Tim March, another great man. He had his wife there, he had his mother-in-law there. So thank you so much for the support, and many, many other people. You know, it used to be that you'd turn up at a polling booth and you might have 1 or 2 hardy One Nation volunteers in Orange. Nowadays, we quite often outnumber the other parties, especially the Labor Party, which is highly organised and got a lot of money, but we quite often outnumber them. So it's wonderful to see the growth in One Nation. It's not just in the polls, which can be theoretical, it's also on the ground. Then I went to Gurna, where I met Zoe Jones, and she's a blonde woman, and she's dynamite. She is standing up for conservative values. So thank you so much for what you do, Zoe. And she's a great parent because she's got a 12-year-old daughter there who's an activist as well. But Ava is not a shouting, burning type of activist, but just understands conservative values. 12 years old, her maturity was phenomenal. It is phenomenal. Then I went to Mawson, the last stop before going back to the airport, and I met Tyler Green. And what a bundle of energy he is. Very well informed, a tradie. So these are good people right across the electorate. And thank you so much to the volunteers, because it's really nice to have solid conversations with people who are committed to returning their state of South Australia back to normality. It's the highest electricity prices in the country, and that makes it one of the highest in the world, if not the highest in the world. So you're putting up with a lot of crap. Next, Lisa Perry, another actively engaged person in democracy. This is her message. On March 26th, we're launching something simple, visible, and powerful. It's National Orange Day. Yes, you heard it right, National Orange Day. Wear orange. Don't eat an orange, but wear orange. National Orange Day on March 26th is to remind let me see, is that 25th or 26th, right? Am I reading that correct? 26th? It is 26th. March 26th is to remind this nation that when everyday Australians stand together, our voice will be heard. It cannot be ignored. It strengthens in power, in numbers, and in support. So it's Orange Day, and there you see the logo up there. And that's what we mean by orange. And by the way, what can you notice about those T-shirts? Anybody want to make a comment? It now no longer says Pauline Hanson's One Nation, it says One Nation. So it's truly no longer Pauline's party, it's the party of the people. And I'm very proud, when it was Pauline Hanson's, I'm very proud to be associated with her, and just as proud to be with just One Nation. Very, very proud of that concept of One Nation. Okay, what do we got coming up? Oh, that's right, the COVID compensation. Another $125 million. That's for the Victorian government paying out to COVID victims. The Victorian government has settled a long-running class action, wants to get everything tidied up before the election, get it all out of the way, get out of the headlines, because those bastards in Victoria really hurt their people, even more so than the other states. Long-running class action lawsuit over Victoria's COVID response. Small businesses who lost everything started the class action. They rightly started the legal action, rather. Yeah, it's a class action. They rightly blamed the state Labor government of Dan Andrews and Jacinda Allen for their loss, and they're holding the government to account. They're holding them accountable. This humanitarian disaster happened because the government deliberately pursued a strategy designed to make the public panic. Just panic, 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 panic. Because when people panic, they lose control of their logic, their intellect, and they just are easy to control. That's why the panic was on. Health measures that changed every day, literally every day. And they all the premiers said they were so-called on the science, but the different states had different science, and different days they had different science. I can remember Yvette D'Ath, the health minister up here. What a piece of work she was. She had a press conference, I'm just diverting from the Victorian story because she had a press conference. I'll always remember this. And she was saying that people driving in cars must wear masks. And a journalist just piped up and said, put up his hand, or her hand, I can't remember that, but and said, what about drivers when they're on their own? Do they have to wear a mask? And Yvette D'Ath went, yes. I mean, that's the state of the science that they ripped across our heads during that COVID. Health measures that changed every day. Stay-at-home orders, the most drastic and inhuman worldwide. Victoria led the negative race. Business closures, social distancing, masking and restrictions on going outside into the fresh air and sunshine. What the hell are they doing? They're depriving people of the best source of vitamin D, sunshine, which is essential for fighting a virus, and they're stopping the fresh air. And crazy stuff, and exercise. All these measures, which were contradictory to the science and contradictory to common sense and contradictory to good health, all these destroyed businesses, relationships, marriages, and set our children back years in their maturation and education and social development. So why create the panic? Because fear makes compliance. And they needed to keep fear going until the injections, the COVID injections, were ready to ship. They're not vaccines. They're COVID injections. I believe this should have been a class action lawsuit. It should have been a criminal trial. Should not have been a class action lawsuit. Sorry, it should have been a criminal trial. While we're on the subject of COVID, the COVID compensation scheme, and Wednesday's a current affairs segment titled "Fight for Justice After COVID-19 Vaccine Injury." See, now even the mainstream media is acknowledging that there are vaccine injuries. There have been more than 30,000 deaths, homicides, due to those stinking injections. Now, I've raised the compensation scheme several times during Senate estimates sessions and in Senate speeches, sharing my concerns alongside those of many claimants who had significant difficulties with this scheme. Why? Because I'll tell you why they're having significant difficulties. Because the scheme is designed to not pay out. It's just like the Department of Veteran Affairs, the DVA. That many veterans tell me that they're doing whatever they can to get to be frustrated. The department is doing whatever it can to frustrate them getting their payments. Anyway, a gentleman called Chris got the COVID-19 injection because he was told every day to protect the people around him, especially the vulnerable. So he got it to protect those people because that saying was drilled into him. Chris said, quote, "It destroyed his bloody life. It destroyed his life." That after getting the AstraZeneca jab, he was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare acute autoimmune disorder where the immune system attacks peripheral nerves, causing rapid muscle weakness, tingling, and potential paralysis. Quite often it's a paralysis of one side of the face or the other. Chris is one of almost 5,000 Australians seeking compensation. And that's the tip of the iceberg, and I mean that sincerely. I know that for a fact. Most people have given up. They don't make application for compensation because they know it's just about impossible. So he's one of 5,000 seeking compensation through the government's COVID-19 injection claim scheme. I think it's called vaccination. I have to use the word there. Which is advertised as simple and quick. What a lot of bullshit. Yet it took this man a year to compile the necessary evidence of over 1,000 pages and another 498 days, almost 500 days, just to get an offer. Simple and quick. Oh, must be like safe and effective, eh? They're neither. Chris received a $6.5 million payout, so this was bloody serious. They delayed him a year and a half. A year and then 500 days. That's a year and a half, yeah. The biggest ever COVID compensation payment. But he'll never be able to work again. And get this, the Australian Taxation Office is now taxing almost $2.4 million. They're just taking it of that payment because the scheme classifies lost income compensation as taxable income. So the government is giving $2.4 million from one agency to another agency and giving him what's left. It's just like the personal injury lawyers say the scheme is so complex and so poorly designed that it actively fails legitimately injured people. Just like the DVA, as I said. Chris's lawyer said, he's a bit soft in his language, to award damages and then take a third of it back is really problematic. Problematic, it's completely unfair, it's wrong. And what a mess. Just shuffling money around, keeping bureaucrats in work, shuffling money from one agency to the next. There's so much bullshit in this country, in addition to the woke. The question here isn't about the legality of the scheme, it's about the morality of the scheme. Not the legality, the morality. More than 150 injection-injured Australians are still stuck navigating the same broken system. And there are 30,000 plus deaths and hundreds of thousands of people injured. Thousands have given up, as the Morrison government bloody well intended it to. They've given up. Advocates, meaning lawyers, argue that the government must urgently fix the taxation rules and process claims faster. Chris, the injured person, believes the system is built to wear people down. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. We've asked questions of the Morrison government. We've asked questions of the Labor government that replaced it. They're both blind, deaf, and mute. Must urgently fix the taxation rules and process claims faster. Chris believes the system is built to wear people down, as I said, saying it feels designed to either see you go away or pass away. Spot on, mate. This is a 5-minute video that I'm about to show you, Ryan's about to show you. We'll put the link below in the comments if you want to watch the whole. We'll play a segment just now. If you want to watch the whole 5.5 minutes, watch this. Click on the segment.
Quick to do what he thought was the right thing to protect himself and his nearest and dearest. He got the jab, which he says destroyed his life. For that, he received the biggest ever COVID payout, more than $6 million, but it comes with a sting.
Chris, why did you get vaccinated?
To protect people around me, first and foremost. You know, we were told every day to protect those around us, especially the vulnerable. So get vaccinated to protect those people, and that's what I did.
First came the jab.
I got the AstraZeneca vaccination.
Then the 4-year fight with bureaucracy.
I think the entire treatment of COVID-19 vaccine injured people is cruel.
Like most of us, Chris trusted the promise that a COVID-19 vaccination would protect his life.
Every single Victorian should get this because it will change the way we live.
Too right, it'll change the way so many Australians live. I still feel angry. You know, I'm known in the Senate, and most of my friends know me as not someone who does not get angry very easily and rarely gets angry. I decided to see Dan Andrews there, and I started to feel the anger bubbling up. And the talk about the protection of these injections, the anger started coming back again. We need a proper royal commission into the mismanagement of COVID. I promised, and I've repeated that promise, to hound down those responsible, and with a one nation government, it's a promise that we intend to keep. The first step is getting balance of power. Balance of payment's a trade thing that we're in trouble with now in this country, but that's a key issue for us as well. But balance of power, and then get government. They're the steps we're looking at. Misinformation buster. Explanation of why we voted the way we did regarding the gas export tax. Most people understand it, but we've had a few questions about why we voted against the amendments. Adam Griffith on Facebook commented, "Why did you vote against the export gas tax?" We didn't. We didn't. Hang on, just put that back up, please, Ryan. So what Adam said was, why did you vote against the export gas tax when you have previously said you would support it? I put together some notes. There you see the... Last Thursday, One Nation submitted a bill to create a domestic gas reservation of 15%. 15% of gas set aside for domestic use, instead of exporting it overseas and bringing it back at a higher price. We have some of the highest gas prices in the world. The Labor Party and the Greens voted to block the bill from being introduced. They wouldn't even let us introduce the bill. They said it wasn't introduced in the same week. It wasn't quite a week, but I think it was 6 days. But they introduced a bill the next day and processed it straight away. They just wanted blocking the bill. Meant no vote coming out of the debate would be binding on the government. From this point forward, the Greens and the ALP, the Labor Party, ensured the debate was just talk. Look, the biggest issue, and I've got to give Barnaby credit for this, I'm just going to sidetrack from my notes. The Americans and the Israelis, or it should be the other way around, the Israelis and then the Americans bombed Iran, Friday the 28th of February. The first Monday after, the 2nd of March, just 3 days later, we had a party meeting, and Barnaby said, he's got a lot of experience, that man. He said, we've got to get onto the fuel crisis because there will be a crisis with this war in the Middle East. Strait of Hormuz. Barnaby predicted the whole lot. He said, if we don't get onto the truckies and get them fuel, and the farmers and the miners who produce the coal for the power stations using diesel, then the country will stop and people will starve. It's that simple. And he said, the other bastards won't even be talking about it. And he was right. I raised it on the Monday, straight after that party meeting in the Senate, with a question time. Senator Ayres lied to me and omitted things for me. He deceived the people of Australia. The next day, we asked him another question because we worked out what he'd done. And he was so embarrassed he didn't even talk to us. And yet that man called us far-right extremists because we dared raise fuel security and embarrass him. I mean, it doesn't worry us. It means that we're over the target when they give us labels and insults and smears. Pauline also raised it on the Tuesday. She introduced her bill, motion for introducing her legislation. And the next day, Senator Bell from New South Wales, One Nation, he asked a question again. And then on Thursday, I spoke off the cuff for about 5 minutes about what the government's inaction and what it was going to cause the country. And then Pauline spoke again on her. When they wouldn't let her speak to a bill, move a bill, she moved a motion to just discuss the issue, and that's what happened. So in that motion, we called on the government to create a 15%, I want to get the words correct here, 15% domestic gas reservation, and to change the gas tax called the Petroleum Rent Resources Tax in a way that would increase tax collection on exported gas. The way the tax system is set up in this country, thanks to Robert Menzies back in 1953, means that many of Australia's large companies are foreign-owned and do not have to pay company tax. Do not pay company tax. And then Bob Hawke from the Labor Party, so both sides of the Union Party worked on this to get their mates and the multinationals off the hook. Bob Hawke rejigged the Petroleum Rent Resources Tax so that the world's biggest tax evader, Chevron Oil in America, would not pay tax. And hardly anyone pays tax. And they don't pay much in the way of royalties. John Howard made sure of that. His government made sure they didn't pay much in royalties. So they're taking our gas, exporting it, and not leaving much behind. And we're getting bugger all for it. So what we wanted to do, and what Pauline's been talking about for years, and pushing for years, very, very strongly, and I've been supporting her for years, is to charge a wellhead, volume-based tax. Or it's a royalty. And they can't dodge it because with the PRRT and with company tax, what they do is they do things and charge their own subsidiaries a high amount for it, and therefore they reduce their profit, their book profit. But they're sending boatloads of cash overseas. So they're making out like bandits, but they look like they've got hardly anything in profits because they've done it all in the books, made their costs very high, inflated them. It's called transfer pricing, rort, and so they dodge tax. When you tax someone for a physical quantity, it doesn't matter about profit and loss because it's irrelevant. So we get the money into our taxation system, which means we can reduce tax for families and small businesses. And we wanted to tax them $10 billion a year. This is not something we thought of in the last few minutes. It's something we took to the last election, and Pauline's been talking about for years, as have I. Now the Greens, then what happens in politics sometimes is people try to look good, not do good, and they try to wedge other parties. So the Greens amended our motion to remove the domestic gas reservation. That's right, I said it, to remove the domestic gas reservation. So the Greens want to send the whole bloody lot overseas. And the Greens wanted to increase the PRRT to 25% on exports. If you're paying zero tax, then 25% of zero is zero. They'll still be paying zero tax because it's the PRRT that determines the rate. One Nation opposed that because we support Australian gas being used here to keep gas prices down for all Australians and to provide for fuel security. And Pauline made note of the fact that it's not just for keeping gas alive in domestic use and industry, it's about converting gas to liquid fuels, diesel and petrol in Brisbane and the East Coast, build a pipeline across the country. Again, not something that we thought of in the last 5 minutes. This is something we've been pushing as policy. The Greens wanted to drop all of that. So we want to keep gas prices down for all Australians and for a new industry converting cheap Australian gas into petrol and diesel, liquid fuels. The Greens amendment meant the Greens don't support Australian gas for Australians. And where the small Australian supply is not enough, the gas we import back into Australia, our own gas shipped overseas and brought back at a higher price, will be 25% dearer because of their tax. It's insane. You can't tax exported gas without making sure there is a secure supply to cover Australia's needs. Now the Greens are saying the One Nation have a love gas companies, which is a lie that covers up their deceit in blocking our bill and in taxing re-imported Australian gas. Look, the Greens hate Australians. The Greens, in Stephanie Hodgson's May, the Green senator from Victoria, described gas as she was moving her to introduce her so-called tax, 25% of nothing is still nothing. She referred to it as toxic gas. So she wants to export it, but not use it here. What is it about these people? We want to export our coal, but we can't use it here. So we've got to have higher electricity prices. 25% of nothing is nothing. Transfer pricing means no tax. Speaking of economics, stagflation. In the last few weeks, Australia has moved into stagflation. You've probably seen the word in the media. This was the ruinous hole in the Australian economy that we fell into in the 70s and mid-80s, where prices went up, inflation, and unemployment went up while the economy shrank. So thanks to Treasurer Chalmers' incompetence and misrepresentations, and I go so far as to say dishonesty, because he omits things and he says things that aren't true, we're now experiencing stagflation for the first time in 40 years. Inflation is up, unemployment is up, and gross domestic product is falling. We have less to be shared around and more people coming in to share it with. So we're bringing in record numbers of people, and I'll get to that in a minute, record numbers of people. Anthony Albanese's Labor government has broke the record for immigration several times, and he's just done it again according to figures last week. I warned about the risk of stagflation to the Senate in July 2022, nearly 4 years ago. One Nation saw this coming, and we warned about stagflation territory again in June 2024. We were entering the stagflation territory, I said, and we warned that in June 2024. So July 2022, 2 years later, in June 2024. We saw it coming. Why didn't the bloody government? Because they're hopeless. Businesses are experiencing rising costs, yet their sales are not going up at the same rate, so they put up prices or go broke. Both can happen at the same time. Business bankruptcies under Labor are at record levels. There's another record that they've got. Record levels of immigration and record levels of business bankruptcy. How the hell can you have record bankruptcies when we've got more people coming in as customers? And the record levels of bankruptcies are even higher than Morrison achieved during COVID, when he smashed small businesses deliberately. Rising costs and falling sales mean businesses don't hire new staff or don't replace existing staff who leave. So that's what happens. Businesses stagnate. So consumers are understanding this mess. Consumer confidence is now at the lowest level since COVID. And by the way, just this morning I was replying to someone who left me a message last night saying, how does he get someone who wants to become a One Nation candidate involved with the party? So I told him that, and then I said, and he's a financier, and I said, how are things? And he said, mate, we're terrified about the economy because the level of investment, people just don't want money anymore because they're not willing to invest. So consumers are understanding it. As I said, consumer confidence is now at the lowest level since COVID. The only antidote for stagflation, the only antidote is to shrink the bloody government. So how do you do that? You stop spending on all the wasteful frivolities and fashionable items, and you focus spending only on what we need: health, Medicare, education, and defence in particular, and infrastructure. This is all laid out in our plan for the last federal election campaign, well before the election, 5 months before the election, spending only on what we need: health, Medicare, education, and defence in particular. Then, as I said, build, baby, build, to use Donald Trump's words. Infrastructure. Expand the economy with new investment, new real jobs in mining, manufacturing and transport. Investment in infrastructure. I don't know what's the matter with this uni party. They just want to invest in infrastructure. Investing in productive capacity, well thought through, is the quickest way to improve productivity. And when you improve productivity, you get non-inflationary wage rises because people can afford the efficiency. This is the core of the economic plan we took to last year's election, and we will provide more detail in our budget reply, so stay tuned for that. Budget early May. Anthony Albanese again. He commented that One Nation wants Australia to go back to the 1950s or 60s. Can you play that video, please, Ryan?
Politicians, some of which have risen up recently in polling, who are essentially appealing to vote for us and the world will stop. Or worse still, we'll go back to the Australia of the 1950s or 60s with the same population that looked like that. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And it's a fool's errand. What we need to do is to make sure that we acknowledge that this is a rapid period of change. That won't continue. But we need to make sure that governments work with industry and civil society to shape that change in Australia's national interest. If we do that, we, the greatest country on earth, can be even more successful into the future. I'm certainly of that view.
What a crock. What a crock. First of all, that's not what we've said. Let's have a look at why some of our voters, and dare we say some of Labor's voters, yes, they're coming to us too, remember this era very, very fondly. This was the period that created the Australian dream. The Australian dream. Home ownership and affordability was at its height, with home ownership rising from 53% in 1942 to what's that figure, Ryan? 94%. 53% in 47 to 64% in 1954, and finally got to 70% in 1981. 70% home ownership. Among young people in Australia today, it's only about 36%. So that's around half of what it was. Who wouldn't want to go back to that period? Who wouldn't want it? That's the things we're talking about. And much more than that, we talk about the social aspects. These homes were affordable. The money started here in Australia, and it stayed here with the asset, along with the asset. We had plenty of manufacturing, and our money stayed here. And those homes were affordable. They were within easy reach of people, within reach of people. People knew that if they made reasonable sacrifices and worked hard, they would be rewarded with a house. The Prime Minister mentions the 1950s. Okay, the average home wage was between 7,000 to 8,000, with people earning the average home cost between 7,800 with 7,000 8,000, with people earning $2,000 per year. So you could easily borrow the $8,000, $9,000 for a house. Wages were so healthy, a single income could carry a family and families. So we had one person earning the money, another person staying home looking after the children. Huge social benefit. In the 1950s, the birth rate was 3.55, with people getting married young and divorcing rarely. 91% of all children were brought into married homes. 91%. And yes, there was a large post-war migration program. Australia had a small population, and the migration was from almost exclusively European nations. That changed, and somewhat it was good that it changed. But European nations initially that shared the values and the culture that Australia had. Christian-based, and regardless of language, they were Europeans and they understood the culture. while there was obviously some difficulty integrating, because we call them WOPs and WOGs, and hell, I'm a migrant myself. I was born in India, didn't come out until after my formative years at the age of 7, and so nonetheless we were culturally similar, and Indians have many cultural similarities with Australians. But the migrants back then, and some still, this still applies, so I'm not tarnishing all migrants, but the migrants back then that were allowed into this country after a very strict jumping through the hoops had a strong work ethic in an environment where the government incentivized them to integrate. People were told, become Australian. That was the mantra, become Australian, integrate. It was about becoming Australians, not starting a multi-ethnic enclaves. European migrants in this era were not terrorizing the streets of our major cities, wielding machetes, protesting for terrorists who want to destroy our country, or pretending they don't know that sexual assault is a crime. If anything, this period of history shows that migration can work if the government is selective. That's the key word, selective. Selective. Immigration policy, number one beneficiary of the immigration policy is the people already here. Already here. Immigration policy should be made up to benefit the people of Australia already here. And that's no longer the case. It started under John Howard, this rot. It accelerated under the other Prime Ministers following him, Rudd, Gillard, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison, and Albanese's made a dreadful mess of it. Dreadful mess of it. And so what we used to do back then was put expectations on the people who arrived instead of forcing Australians to change. So if you're a newcomer to Australia, the expectations were on you to change. If you're an Aussie, welcome the people, but you don't change, because we want to keep Australia for Australians. There are also projects waiting for migrants, such as the Snowy Mountain Scheme, infrastructure, good jobs. Today the project awaiting migrants is a voting booth and a welfare line, because that's what Labor's doing, bringing in people who will vote for it. You know, then we brought in Vietnamese boat people, and they had the same work ethic as Europeans. Then South Americans, same work ethic. Then South Africans, same work ethic. Then Indians, in limited quantities, not overwhelming as they are now. The same qualities, work ethic. Some of the Indians are the most productive people in the world. Then the Chinese, we've had Chinese here since the gold rushes in the Palmer River in Queensland, in the goldfields of Victoria back in the 19th century, 1800s. The Chinese are wonderful people, business people, hard workers. That's what we want, hard work, hard-working people. They shared a few similarities, as I said. All those races, all those nationalities, hard-working, wanted to be Aussies. Above all, wanted to be Aussies. Some were Christian or compatible with Christianity. Notice I haven't mentioned skin colour. There were many varied skin colours that came in. Many varied skin colours that came in. Our population was overwhelmingly Australian-born back then with European heritage, making us culturally coherent and ideologically aligned to the dream of Western enlightenment, Western civilization. And people of all nationalities and all races and skin colours wanted to come here. And we let them in, providing they would fit in with Australia and become Australian. We had close spiritual roots to our country back then and a history and legacy to protect. In 1947, 10% of Australians were born overseas. I was one of them. Well, I wasn't 47, but even in 1960, what's that figure, Ryan? I can't read it. 90% of Australians were Australian-born, and virtually all migrants were Europeans. Today in Sydney, 40% were born overseas. How the hell can you keep a cultural identity and a cohesiveness like that? Especially when you then say, go and keep your past culture, don't worry about integrating and assimilating in Australia. Only 40% can claim any sort of European or Australian heritage. Only 20.4% of Sydney are of Australian descent. 80% are not. That makes Aussie kids a minority in their largest city. So yes, Albanese, they feel something has gone terribly wrong. They want the 50s back affordable housing, one family member, one adult parent at home, stable, secure projects keeping Australians in jobs, and manufacturing that stayed in Australia. This is also the golden era for business and the economy. We were a manufacturing powerhouse. We built things, we sold things. We were almost totally independent of any other country. Now we're dependent on so many other countries. And that's been planned. It's been managed decline. We sold things that were made in Australia. We exported. We were fully employed. We were an economically excited population full of hope and dreams. Australians could start businesses and employ people. That was the guts of our country. How many people want to start a business after COVID? Thanks to the Uni Party, the federal government under the Liberal Party, and the state governments, mostly under Labor governments, worked together to destroy small business. So you could get a shot and have a barbecue at Bunnings, but you couldn't even go into your local hardware store because it was locked up. When they saw the government could destroy everything, and I know some terrible stories of people who built a gym or a business, and then the day they were due to open it, everything was locked down for no bloody reason other than to keep multinational corporations in a competitive advantage. So they built a business overnight with no compensation, no consequence. They destroyed the businesses, and that's if they'd get through the red tape. The red tape is frightening now. The cost of doing business is horrific. The question I have for you, Prime Minister, is why don't you want to rebuild Australia to give people the same hope and prosperity they had in the 50s and 60s? Why? And speaking of disasters, Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen, what a mess they've got with their fuel supply task force. At first, we were the first to raise this issue, thanks to Barnaby Joyce and his experience. Then when we raised it, we were called far-right extremists for raising fuel security. Fuel security. Security does several things. It keeps the trucks running, keeps the farmers farming. And then you've got the volatility. When you've got decent fuel reserves, you can let a bit more fuel out of the reserves to keep the prices from being volatile. Without that, you've got volatility in the prices, and you can see that. I said this on Monday, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I was laughed at by Tim Ayres, the buffoon, calling us far-right extremists for protecting people's cost of living, protecting people's access to fuel security, and paying lower prices. What an empty slogan. You know, just calling me a far-right extremist doesn't make me a far-right extremist. And it's an empty slogan. And these days they use slogans everywhere all the time. It's just worthless. It means they don't have a bloody answer to our questions. And then eventually he started lying about it. And then we picked him up the next day. They have set up now a fuel supply task force because they admitted there is a crisis, and we foresaw it, with someone called Anthea Harris as head. She was formerly the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Australian Energy Regulator. So we've got someone wanting to kill Australian energy in charge. If Australian Energy Regulator, they're just killing electricity in this country. Hope she changes her spots. And it's another national cabinet, which could mean they keep it secret for another 50 years, as they did with COVID. Got a video for us there, have you, Ryan?
National Cabinet to address fuel security and supply chain preparedness in Australia in response to the conflict in the Middle East. I want to assure Australians at this time that Australia is well prepared. Our fuel supply is currently secure. However, I want us to be over-prepared. I understand there are Australians in some parts of our nation that are really worried as they watch what is unfolding in the Middle East, and that is understandable. But we're doing all that we can to secure our fuel supply and to get it to the places that need it. My message to Australians is please do not take more fuel than you need. It's the Australian way, to think of others, to think of their neighbours, their community, and also to think of the national interest.
So this is necessary because for decades the government has put zero effort into managing our critical resources or wargaming likely geopolitical outcomes that impact our supply lines. they won't rule out fuel rationing. And this applies to the Liberal cheek and the Labor cheek of the Uni Party. They have ruled out cutting excise tax. They've ruled that out, so they can make up their mind about that pretty bloody quickly. Why? Because they've got the economy into a mess and they can't afford to relax on any tax. Yet they've ruled out cutting excise tax, as I said, and One Nation policy of halving excise tax on fuel, petrol and diesel, which we took to the last election, and it's still a current policy. It's good for the economy. It's non-inflationary way of reducing the cost of living. Even though they knew full well that these price hikes will have devastating impacts on our food supply, transport networks and cost of living, they won't reduce the fuel excise. Even Morrison gave it a trial during COVID, briefly. But he needed the cash as well. Okay, the Institute of Public Affairs, pretty good organisation, has just released a report on immigration. The Labor government promises to cut migration, as they do every year. That's what they promise every year. Yet the data says completely differently. 500,000 would-be immigrants would be arrived on a net basis over the 12 months to January 2026. That means if you take away the people that leave and add the people that come in, then it leaves a total of 500,000 coming in net. So that means our population goes up 500,000. Look at the graph. Look at that graph. You can see the man who started it way back in 1996 was John Howard's government. They doubled immigration. They're the ones who started the mass immigration. And then the others, Rudd, Gillard, who was next, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison, doubled it above John Howard's doubling. Then we had the COVID drop where it went to almost zero. And then look what's happened. Anthony Albanese said, we'll get it back to pre-COVID levels. We disagreed with that. It was too high. But he went way beyond. He's gone 50% above the pre-COVID levels. Then he said he'd bring it down. And look at it, it's now higher. It's now higher this year, this last year, 2025 through to January 26. 12 months to January 26. The Australian Bureau of Statistics updated its overseas arrivals and departures database with the reference period to January 2026. The IPA's analysis of the data shows net permanent and long-term arrivals, that's people who have arrived in Australia with a declared intention to stay in the country for 12 months or longer, in January 26, were 57,270, the highest January net arrivals on record. The highest net arrivals for January on record. Net permanent and long-term arrivals totaled 494,540 in the 12 months to January 2026, the highest permanent and long-term arrivals in recorded history, the highest in history. So much for Anthony Albanese promising to reduce migration. What these bastards do is One Nation raises an issue, they either call us a name, or they lie, or they divert, but eventually the chickens come home to roost. The number of people coming to settle in Australia reached record highs as the size of Australia's migrant population is growing larger than ever. Larger than ever. The Albanese government has been unable or unwilling to genuinely reform our migration system, said Dr. Yu from the IPA. Albanese wants you to believe that his government is cutting migration, which is false. He is lying to you. As of January 1, 2026, there were 3 million temporary visa holders staying or residing in Australia. Actually, 2.98. That's as near to 3 million as it can be. The highest number on record. Another bloody record. A 4.24% growth on the previous year in terms of temporary visa holders. The federal government's half-hearted amendments, this is quoting Dr. Yu from the IPA, the federal government's half-hearted amendments to the nation's visa rules have failed to deter a wave of settlers who intend to stay in Australia for the next 12 months and beyond. I don't blame migrants for wanting to come to Australia. I mean, who wouldn't want to come here? Be even better if it was like the 50s and 60s, but it isn't. But we still have one of the best countries in the world. It's in managed decline. We've got to arrest that decline and turn it around. But the issues we are facing are caused by this government's mass migration, and it's turned into mass invasion. And the blame sits squarely on Albanese and his mob. It's mass migration. Brings in some of these things. One of my staff just rattled off this list. She's pretty good. Housing crisis, cost of living crisis, more people trying to buy same amount of good, more people wanting to buy more goods out of the same production, which raises costs. Fuel crisis, congestion, 130,000 people living on the streets. Another record, Anthony Albanese. Families living in tents and cars and under bridges. How do you stop? Inflation, overburdened health and other public services, overcrowded schools. What about social cohesion being smashed? Cultural shift. And let's come back to that social cohesion being smashed deliberately, not only by sheer numbers of different people coming in, different backgrounds, but then the same people being told, stay as you are, live like you used to live in your old country. We want to change Australia to be multicultural. That's rubbish. That's rubbish. It's not. We want to endorse and keep the Australian culture. And then we've got violence. They're just some of the things coming in. I'll go through my 5 words again for immigration. Numbers. One Nation wants net negative. So net migration, more people leave than come in for a period until we catch up with housing. So net negative. Numbers. Quality. We want people who can go to work and be productive and not bludgeon the country straight away. We want to preserve the Australian culture, the values, the laws. We want people who are willing to assimilate, just like in the 50s and 60s and 70s when people were told, you are expected to assimilate and integrate. So that's numbers, quality, culture, assimilate and integrate. And then the 5th word is identity. Preserve the Australian identity. And I'll say it again. Immigration policy should be targeting benefits for Australians. The immigration policy should be benefiting Australians, not immigrants. Immigrants have a privilege if they come here, but the benefits should be to Australians. Oh, and we've got the next issue. The President of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is heading to Australia to discuss a trade deal. So I usually go, oh no, because Liberal and Labor governments have sold us down the drain so much in the past, so often. They have a headline that says something like tomato farmers will benefit, but everyone else is going to be destroyed. That's what happened. And the Americans have got saving clauses in their agreements with us, but we just seem to want to open up everything and make it difficult for us and make it easier for foreigners. This trade deal, has been in the works since 2023 and was stalled because the European Union made outrageous demands on Australia. The European Union did not offer Australia proper access to its beef, lamb, dairy and sugar market because it's a highly protectionist bloc. The European Union has huge tariffs on imported goods in farming sector. And same with the Americans in some sectors of farming. They're protecting themselves, but they want to rape us. European Union farmers are under huge pressure because of all the bullshit on net zero and many other things that they're doing over there. They do not want any other nations competing against them. Now they want our lithium, cobalt and rare earths, just like the Americans want it. There is nothing to suggest the European Union has changed its position on our agricultural industry having access to their market. So we wonder what sort of deal is being drafted and whether it will hold any benefit to young Australians and to regional Australians. Electric cars. Another electric vehicle company has collapsed. Another one. Oh, and by the way, Porsche and Mercedes have said, whoops, we made a mistake. We're going to go back to building, in Mercedes' case, V8s, and Porsche and Mercedes, petrol and diesel cars. And the Americans are started changing their fleets back, production fleets back to petrol and diesel. They're scrapping their plans for making electric cars. So this company that's shutting now is based in Brisbane. They cited a sudden change in global production strategy from Ford. Ford is shutting down its EV plans, which, quote, removed the foundation of future supply. They were making the first right-hand drive electric fleet utes. No word from Labor, or the Greens, or the Teals, who have spent all week claiming electrical cars are our saviour from the fuel crisis. Electrical cars need a lot of fuel just to be made. Here's a real local company producing what they say they want, and yet politicians have no comment. They probably don't even know it's happening. This is the car Chris Bowen, Energy Minister, my goodness, what a waste of space for energy. This is the car that he test drove. But it just cost too much. $280,000. And that's how it became a $19.5 billion black hole for the EV industry. As soon as Trump relaxed the car market in America, no more subsidies for EVs, it's ditched the full electric models. And unless we start making cars here, we're tied to whatever America, Europe and Asia tries to sell us. As I said, Mercedes, Porsche, Chrysler, Stellantis as it's called now, General Motors, Honda. Honda's just made a huge loss. The first in its history. It's always been a ruthlessly disciplined financially disciplined company, and it's had its first loss ever, thanks to being driven down the road of EVs and now realizing no one wants them. Okay, speaking of crap, Paris Agreement. Well, here's a reason you should vote for One Nation at the South Australian election over the weekend. The Uni Party never changes. Just listen to this litany of tweets and things. Matt Canavan's involved. Even when the Nationals select one of its best backbenchers, Matt Canavan, for the leadership, it's taken less than 2 weeks for him to ditch his principles and toe the party line on net zero and the Paris Agreement. Look, let's face it. The Nationals are the tail on the Liberal dog. The Liberals wag and the Nationals get flung around and they change their policy. For years, Matt, who's bright, engaging, clever, he's very effective on social media and in the media. For years, he's been tweeting and writing that we should leave the Paris Agreement, that it's a matter of urgency. What utter hypocrisy. What utter weakness and gutlessness. The Liberals decide, as I said, that they're staying in Paris, and so the national tail comes between the Liberal Party dog's legs. Look at this. Australia should leave the Paris Agreement. So can you go back? Matt says in, what date is that? June 9th, 2024. Almost 2 years ago. He says Australia should leave the Paris Agreement. Ever since we signed up to net zero, we've had soaring prices. Correct. Skyrocketing interest rates. Correct. Witnessed most other nations completely ignoring their commitments. Correct, correct, correct. We should take care of Australia's needs first. Correct. Not the Liberal Party's needs, Matt. So when you're voting National, you vote Liberal. I can't read that one, but that's minority of Australians want to stay in Paris. Here's the moment the United States exited the Paris Climate Agreement. Matt's celebrating. What date was that? That was 25. Some people claim that we have to stay in Paris Agreement because otherwise our exports would be hit with carbon tariffs. The EU is the only. This is Matt. The EU is the only region proposing to do this. Their carbon tariffs would impact just 0.11% of our exports. Not even worth worrying about. Thank you, Matt. Why the hell didn't you get out then? Here's a recent video of Matt Canavan seeming to completely abandon his principles.
This policy to turn into pulling out of Paris altogether?
No.
Okay.
Look, I don't know how. I mean, I can be long on this, so I can be short. But
Be short.
The short answer is Paris doesn't impose any particular costs on us. So I only believe in doing things that are good for our country. And I don't think it's good for our country to put ourselves against other countries. But we can have a sensible approach to emissions and energy, most importantly, under the Paris Agreement. We had that when we were in government.
My message to Matt Canavan and others in the LNP coalition: exiting unelected bureaucratic organisations that don't work in our best interests and only work in their own self-interest is what Australia needs for a prosperous future for future generations. Unelected bureaucrats, not for one nation. Staying in the UN Paris Agreement is economic insanity. It's a downfall of our economy. It's already hurting us. It rips our security. And actually, I should mention again, Paris Agreement is not an agreement. It's a bullshit title. When Rudd went to Copenhagen, what happened there was the bureaucrats fought amongst themselves in various countries and tried to come to an agreement in Copenhagen UN conference back in 2010, I think it was, roughly around then. But they couldn't come up with an agreement. And all the princes and kings and queens and prime ministers and presidents flew in at the end of Copenhagen on schedule, no bloody agreement. Very embarrassing for the UN, very embarrassing for all people like Kevin Rudd, sycophants to the UN. So they changed their tactics for Paris. They didn't change their policy, they changed their tactics. Didn't change their policy in energy, they changed their tactics on how to put on a show. So the princes, the presidents, and the prime ministers, and the queens and kings all came in at the start of the conference, so they have all the headlines. Then they buggered off. And they were left to the bureaucrats to get to it and come up with an agreement. And when the bureaucrats failed to get agreement, they simply said, how about we have an agreement that you can do whatever you want to do? So China says, we'll do nothing until maybe 2050, and then we'll think about it. And India says pretty much the same thing. So they signed the Paris Agreement. That was what they were going to do, nothing. And Australia said, under Tony Abbott, and then ratified under Malcolm Turnbull, and endorsed by the Labor Party, we'll destroy our economy. That's our agreement. And they legislated this. This is insane. So they're staying in the National Party is staying in the Paris Agreement. They're staying in net zero. Yes, they are staying in net zero. The National Party started it, and the Liberal Party then followed. They got big headlines: National Party and Liberal Party dump net zero. That is complete lie. They have dumped net zero by 2050, but they have retained the net zero target. It'll still send us broke. It'll still be very bad for the country. So they have just delayed it unspecified, but they're still going for the net zero target. UN Kyoto Protocol, which John Howard's government brought into place to comply with the United Nations demands, and they stole farmers' property rights. Lima Declaration, back in 1975. Gough Whitlam signed it under the Labor Party in 75. Malcolm Fraser ratified it the following year as the Liberal Party president. That gutted our manufacturing, completely gutted it, shipped it all off to Asia and to China. And then Paul Keating, the Labor Party, signed UN Agenda 21, which has now become 2030. They want to put in place an unelected socialist global government by 2030. And Keating signed it, and the person whose government did the most to implement it across Australia, John Howard. Both parties, the Uni Party, Liberal Labor and Nationals, have been part of implementing Agenda 21 to control our Australians and transfer wealth overseas since 1992. Okay, let's go to someone here who's got some bloody common sense. President Javier Milei officially withdraws from the UN World Health Organization. This is already one nation policy. I'm not going to say he's copying, I'm just going to say he's smart. He woke up to the same thing we woke up to a couple of years ago. Exit the hill. I called for this in 2020. So he's exiting the UN World Health Organization. Our policy in One Nation has been now since early last year to exit the UN and to exit the the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. Good news at last. The UN is going broke. You'll be devastated to hear that the United Nations is going completely broke. See, Trump pulled out of paying America's dues. I can remember my mum telling me 55 years ago, what keeps the UN alive is America pays its dues. The Russians don't, the Chinese don't, other people don't. But America's just saying it was effectively bankrolling the whole UN, which was destroying America. And Trump has said, wake up, they're not doing it anymore. So the UN interests spend most of their time being funded by the Yanks to working against Western interests, against the United States' interests. So what Donald Trump has said is no more cash. He's also going to pull out, I think he has pulled out of the UN World Health Organization. So the income for the United Nations is collapsing. It's the worst, quote, it's the worst cash crisis facing the UN in a decade, end of quote. And they're about to run out of liquidity and default on payments. Hallelujah! That's wonderful news! The bastards. They're now demanding other nations pay their dues, as the Secretary General put it. Oh well, I hope Anthony Albanese doesn't, but he won't have the guts to pull out. By the way, the United Nations and Australian Prime Ministers, many of them, have said in the past, and they're ramping up fear on climate, it's the greatest existential crisis that humans face. Well, it's been replaced. It's been replaced. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, the head of the Secretary General, has said the greatest existential crisis now is misinformation and disinformation. Can you believe that? What's happening is that the climate catastrophism is collapsing around the world. And so rather than come out with facts that prove it needs to continue, because they haven't got the facts show there's no climate catastrophe, and governments are waking up to it. The Chinese, the Indians, and many Asian countries and African countries are too busy getting on with life to fall for this crap. So what they're doing now is they're trying to suppress debate, trying to suppress people like me saying it's rubbish, and putting facts out. I won't be able to talk about the facts because it'll go against the climate and energy narratives from the UN. That's what they're doing now. Antonio Guterres is advocating for governments around the world to put in place misinformation and disinformation policies to censor people speaking up against climate catastrophism. And we have got our dopey politicians in the Greens and the Labor Party coming together to run an inquiry. I have never seen an inquiry that is anywhere nearly as bad as the one I've just been a participating member of. Never seen the bias that we've seen in the chair, Senator Whish-Wilson. It's a scam. It is a scam. It's an abrogation of democratic principles. And we're calling it out. I think they've actually done more damage to themselves and their cause for censorship because people can see how one-sided and out of balance it is. Anyway, I was going to talk about Maurice Strong, but we've been going an hour and 10 minutes now, and I won't talk about Maurice Strong now. I'm just going to say one thing about him. He was the man who fabricated climate catastrophism, climate alarm. He was the man. He was a psychopathic maniac, a psychopathic criminal. He was wanting to build... He was one of the co-founders and directors of the Chicago Climate Exchange, which was going to trade carbon dioxide credits, make himself a billionaire, and going back to the item we talked about just a minute ago, give the UN a global carbon dioxide tax to make revenue, to earn revenue, to steal revenue for running the UN. And I'm very proud to have taken part in being pretty strong and outspoken against the carbon dioxide tax that Gillard levied against broke a promise. Okay, South Australian election. If you haven't already voted, there are 2 links. We'll post them down below. Good luck, all One Nation candidates. Thank you for standing up. I was going to wear one of my orange One Nation T-shirts, but it's not a One Nation T-shirt. It's a Pauline Hanson's One Nation T-shirt. So I wanted to make sure people weren't confused. So we've changed our name to One Nation, not Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Thank you, Pauline, for keeping it alive. And I mean that sincerely. What a wonderful job you've done. And you're still in the party and still leading it and still going along strongly. And we're rising. Okay, any questions, comments? Will Australia ever get back to the good old days? I inserted the good in there, Hayden. Yes, we can get back to the good days. All we need to do is get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy, tone down central government, build infrastructure. All we need to do is follow the plan that we released in the election campaign last January 2025, before the election campaign. Australians are one of the best people in the world. They're wonderful people. We've got the people, we've got the potential, we've got the resources, we've got a climate that'll grow almost anything, anywhere, anytime. We've got, right across the country, we've got minerals, we've got energy minerals, we've got metals. We could be self-sufficient. I think we're self-sufficient in just about every mineral except for one. I can't remember what that is. We could be self-sufficient. All we need to do is put in place taxation system to tax foreign multinationals so that families can pay less and get off and get going. We've got huge markets for our products above us, very close to us. We're the closest country to huge markets of Asia, and we can satisfy them. We've got we can have the lowest cost of electricity in the world, and that is a huge competitive advantage. Whoever has the lowest prices in electricity wins. Manufacturing needs the lowest cost of electricity. We had that, and it's been destroyed by the Liberal Labor Uni Party, and the man who started it, John Howard's government. That's who started it. So what we've got to do is just get rid of all the bullshit, get rid of the woke, get rid of the United Nations impulse, and just let Australians produce. Let Australians live. Yes, we can do it. Methven says, we need a royal commission into why our government is taking our country towards one world government and totalitarian control of the population via lies created by UN, World Economic Forum and friends. We don't need a royal commission, mate. You won't get a royal commission out of a government, Liberal or Labor, on this, because they're both complicit in the managed decline of Australia. What we need is more people to wake up and to get involved in active democracy. I've talked about it before, and I'll keep talking about it. Passive democracy leads to neglect, which leads to apathy, which leads then to tyranny. And you can see tyranny creeping in, and censorship and COVID controls, and that leads to anarchy. Because when tyranny comes, it eventually falls apart, and then you get anarchy, and then you get freedom again. Now, what we need to do is to get active democracy back. That means voting. It means voting in an informed way, doing your homework before you vote. So you vote for candidates with principles rather than parties with slogans. It also means holding politicians accountable between elections, visiting their offices, calling them, sending them letters, paper letters signed. But it means getting involved, getting into community groups, becoming a member of a party that you can have an influence on. It means actively getting involved and holding politicians accountable. We'll get it back that way. But it's going to require more people to be awake, so spread the news. Oh yeah, F1 Nation, you hate working class. Mate, we're the Workers' Party now. The Labor Party was complicit in covering up Australia's largest wage theft case. The CFMEU did several deals with the world's largest labour hire firm, a subsidiary of Recruit Holdings in Japan, as well as Australian labour hire firms, dramatically gutted the conditions and the wages of Australian casual workers in the Hunter Valley and in central Queensland. I've fought it for 6.5 years. I'm still fighting it. The Labor Party has been complicit in hiding it, complicit in supporting it. And the Liberal Party just turned a blind eye to it and pretended to do a little bit. We're the only ones that are standing up for that. We're the only ones. And we're trying to get Australia back on track. And who will benefit from that? The working class. That's who will benefit. The Labor Party is ripping you off through super, ripping you off through wage deals that steal wages from out of your pockets. Don't even get to your pockets. So in Australia, the Workers' Party is now one nation. Oh my goodness. Judy B, that's a great question. I haven't got the haven't got the time to rattle them all off. I'll just give you a couple of introduction. Repeal the digital ID. Repeal the misinformation and disinformation if it gets pushed through by the Greens and the Labor Party. Repeal the identity verification bill. And by the way, I'm not opposed to private digital ID. That's up to you. That's up to you. If you want someone to provide you with a digital ID, you can buy that, and then when you've got competition, you'll get security. Because anyone who doesn't have security in their digital ID will go somewhere else. So I'm not opposed to having a digital ID if you want it, but the government shouldn't force it on you and make payment services conditional upon it. But there are many other pieces. Abolish anything to do with net zero. Anything to do with net zero. That's saving $30 billion in waste and duplication, at least $30 billion every year. Not only will it reduce the costs of government by $30 billion, it'll shrink the government to fit the Constitution. It'll enable more efficient energy usage, lower energy prices. So there are several things there. But the big one, so far as repealing, is in a way not repealing, but it's saying we'll have a referendum to insert freedom of speech into our Constitution so that it can't be tarnished. That's something that Pauline and I have introduced years ago. So there's so many things we'd like to repeal, but I can't rattle them off the top of my head here, but there's so many. Last question? Can you go back, please, Ryan? No more questions? Time to move on, gee. The only true poll is on election day. So get out and vote in South Australia, get out and vote in Farrer, get out and vote in Nepean in Victoria. How good will the future of Australia be if this can happen? Look at all the orange. There's some of the polls. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Balance of power. More than the balance of power. Well, that's the weekly wrap-up from the only true opposition party, the sensible party, the only party listening to and serving the Australian people. One nation is Australia first, always has been, always will be. Enjoy your weekend. I'll leave you with a short policy video that One Nation took to the last federal election. The figures may have changed a little, but it's still our policy today. End mass migration. End mass invasion. Have a good weekend. Than ever. It's no secret a lot of people have arrived in Australia. There are 1 million homes being taken out of the rental market by temporary migrants, like international students, driving up your rent. Only 0.6% of migrants work in home building. One Nation will bring the out-of-control migration program back to common sense. We just don't have the homes available right now. We'll make migration net negative so that your rent gets cheaper, so we can put more money back in your pocket.
Authorised Malcolm Roberts, Brisbane.